Hi, I've had a few friends and followers either comment or message or contact me personally asking questions about the recent Motu Proprio restricting the Latin Mass. And the people who have reached out to me are not necessarily Latin Mass attenders. Um, and what they've expressed to me is not really being able to understand like what's the big deal or why people who attend the Latin Mass are upset or afraid or frustrated or angry about the Motu Proprio. And I think that it really comes from a place of these people really want to understand, as friends, what we are experiencing. But it's really hard to understand somebody else's hurt if you haven't been in their shoes. And so I think that these questions are coming from a real genuine place of wanting to understand. And that's what I want to respond to today. Is if you're struggling to understand why some people are so sad or angry or frustrated or hurt by this, because you haven't been in that place and haven't experienced it and don't know what it is to experience it, I want to help just give a little bit of clarification and a little bit of insight into that. And I'm hoping and praying to the Holy Spirit that I can do this from a place of just humility and peace and charity. So just say a quick prayer for me that comes through. So I think a good place to start would be just beginning with my understanding of a few points of the document that really help to highlight the reaction. And there are definitely better places to go to understand like all the nuances, and I've watched so many videos and read so many things explaining the document, so go somewhere else for a full explanation. But I just want to bring up a few points that I think are really helpful in understanding the reaction. So the first one is that the document states that priests who are currently celebrating the Latin Mass have to get permission from their bishop to continue doing so. And so that puts the celebration of the Latin Mass in the hands of the bishops and up to the bishop's discernment, where previously it was that any priest who wanted to celebrate the Latin Mass was able to do so without permission. So that's the first thing. And then the second big point is that newly ordained priests will have the same requirement. If they want to celebrate the Latin Mass, they'll have to get permission from the bishop. But further, for newly ordained priests, the bishop will have to take that to the Vatican, to the Holy See, for like consultation, or I'm not really sure what it is, but they'll have to take that decision to the Holy See before granting permission for newly ordained priests to say the Latin Mass. So those are the restrictions regarding getting permission from the bishop. And then further than that, the document states that no new communities for the Latin Mass should be established. So in parishes or dioceses that don't already have a Latin Mass, it seems to be saying that there shouldn't be a new community made there to say the Latin Mass. However, the document also gives the bishop permission, to oversee and evaluate the existing Latin Mass communities and to shut those down if he sees a need to. Okay, so the priests have to get permission from the bishop, which has to be forwarded to the Holy See in some cases to say the Latin Mass. No new Latin Mass communities may be established, but some may be shut down. And one of the provisions in the document that really kind of struck me was that it stated that where the bishop gives permission for the Latin Mass to be said, he has to designate a place for this to happen. But that place can't be in the parish churches, and that there can't be new personal parishes, like personal churches made for this purpose. And that just immediately brought to my mind the last year we spent in our parish in New York, where we weren't able to have the Latin Mass in our chapel as usual, and we had to attend the Latin Mass in a gymnasium, which was really, really difficult for our family with young kids who think a gym is for running around, and it's just not the most beautiful and reverent place and conducive to worship, and we did the best that we could, but it was not ideal. And so that provision leaves me asking, like, okay, if this permission is granted, but it can't be in the parish church and we can't have new personal churches, then where will these Latin Masses be said? In a gym? In an auditorium? We're not sure. And so that's unclear, and to me, it brings me back to that struggle that we've gone through, the last year of having Latin Mass in the gym. The very real and practical struggles of that. And so that's that's part of where my personal reaction comes from, is having experienced that difficulty already and having that kind of being put on us as a possible reality to be continued in the future. And so I just wanted to help you understand basically what the document is saying, but I think it's also helpful to put ourselves in the other person's shoes. And so we have to remember that, the church is universal, but it's also very diverse. So keep in mind that, the Roman Rite or the Latin Rite, that many of us are part of, the Latin Rite of Catholicism, is not the only one. There are many other rites, and they celebrate the Mass or the Divine Liturgy differently a lot of times. And so the one, I know next to nothing about most of them, but the one that I know like a little bit more than nothing about is the Byzantine Rite of Catholicism. And so they celebrate, they call it the Divine, they're right there, sweetheart. So they celebrate the Divine Liturgy. And so if we just stop to imagine for a minute that instead of this document being released about the Latin Mass, stop to imagine for a minute if this document had been released about the Byzantine Divine Liturgy, and these same restrictions were put on, that any priest who currently celebrates the Divine Liturgy has to get permission from his bishop to continue doing so, or any new priests ordained would have to get permission from the bishop and further the Holy See, that they couldn't have it in their churches. Just imagine that these restrictions were placed on the Byzantine Divine Liturgy. I think that we could all very readily understand why that would be troubling, because it is a different rite of the church, and this is how they worship, and all of a sudden their entire mode of worship, the central heart of their worship, they have to get permission to celebrate it the way that they've always celebrated it. And I think that we can see why that would be troubling. And maybe let's try it again okay, so that's a different rite though. And so I guess the argument could be made that, the English Mass or the ordinary form, which I guess we're not calling it that anymore, but I don't really know how else to talk about it, and the Latin Mass, the extraordinary form, are technically in the same rite, but if you think about it, it's almost as if they're separate rites. And I'm not like a liturgist, so if I'm saying things wrong, I apologize, but I'm just trying to work through my understanding of it. Like sometimes we talk about confession in the old rite and confession in the new rite, meaning going to confession in Latin or going in English, or being baptized in the old rite or being baptized in the new rite. Like there's different rites of baptism depending on whether it's done the old way in the Latin rite, which I just attended one very recently and it was beautiful, or done in the new rite, in which rite all of my children have been baptized. But I think that language can kind of help us think through this. So in a similar way, let's stop to imagine that this document had been put out regarding, the ordinary form of the Mass, and all of a sudden any priest who's been celebrating Mass in the ordinary form has to get permission from his bishop to continue doing so, and any new priest has to get permission from the bishop and forward it to the Vatican in order to say Mass in that rite. I think that it's clear that would be like, why? A priest is ordained to celebrate the Mass. And like, it doesn't really make sense that he would need to get permission to continue celebrating the Mass in the way that he's been saying it. And so I'm not trying to, like, make any arguments here, and I'm not trying to, you know, spur any of that, like, rage or that angry response, but I'm just trying to help you maybe, like, put yourself in the shoes of people who attend the Latin Mass just as people who attend, you know, the ordinary form, or people who attend the Byzantine Divine Liturgy every Sunday, and all of a sudden, you know, it's like this change is being made that you have to get permission to continue doing so when it is the Mass, and it's like a valid celebration of the Mass, and it just doesn't make sense. And I mean, as much as the laity have this reaction of hurt and anger and frustration, I've been thinking a lot about the priests who celebrate the Mass, and, you know, this is their vocation. This is what they've been ordained to do, and that's kind of been, you know, turned on its head a bit. And so I hope that by, you know, kind of putting yourself in those shoes, or imagining these scenarios, that it can just help you understand a little bit where this anger and this hurt and this frustration is coming from. Hang on, yes, sir. Yeah, hey, sweetheart, can you help him warm up the ducky? Thank you. Okay, and I think it might also be helpful for some of you to understand, and especially family and friends, to understand personally where our love for the Latin Mass comes from. So growing up, I grew up in a very faithful and traditionally minded Catholic parish, and Mass was celebrated in the ordinary form. I mean, like most people my age, you didn't have a Latin Mass in your parish.
We left the second side and I can't reach.
Okay, you can hop up on the counter real quick, okay? So yeah, a very traditionally minded, you know, English Mass parish. And I knew that we had a treasure there, but also I grew up with it, and we didn't really move anywhere that we had to experience a distancing from it. So I think that part of me took that for granted. And then when our family moved to New York 3 years ago, we joined the local parish, and it was just, you know, a regular English Mass parish like we knew, and I think we didn't realize how different the different parishes can be, even in the English Mass parishes. And it was a really, I don't want to go too much into the details, but it was a really difficult experience for us, for our family, who wanted more of the reverence and the beauty that we had grown up with, who wanted more of a community for our homeschooling and the way that we lived out our faith and practiced our faith. And all of these things we weren't finding in the parish that we were in, but we were kind of locked into that parish for, again, I don't want to go into the details and the reasons. And so after a very difficult and lonely year at that parish, we realized that not every parish is like the parish that we grew up in and the parish that we had called our home for so many years. And so we started to realize that in order for our needs, our spiritual needs, to be met, we needed to find a parish that would support us and give us what we needed in terms of, sit right here please, in terms of the reverence and the community. So we began looking around for a parish that was more similar to the parish that we had come from, you know, the parish that I grew up in. And we did eventually, you know, thanks be to God, by the grace of God and, you know, the intervention of some very wonderful and holy priests and communities, we found that parish. And at that parish there was also a traditional Latin Mass. And I guess they say the rest is history, right? So we started off like bouncing back between the English Mass and the Latin Mass, and then eventually, you know, the Latin Mass just kind of became where our hearts were. And as we were visiting different Latin Masses in the area and discovered this whole network of Latin Masses and Latin Mass parishes that were occurring, we realized that reverence and that love of beauty and that sense of tradition was more consistent where the Latin Mass was than where the English Mass was. And I don't say this as any form of condemnation or to make anyone feel bad, but I say this because this was our personal experience, and because we did go through a hurtful time for our family, a difficult time for our family. And so, and then we found that we were spiritually fed, and we found that love of reverence and that love of beauty in the Latin Mass community that we found there in the Archdiocese of New York. And so when we came here, when we just moved here, it's 3 weeks ago now, to North Carolina, it was important to us to find a nearby Latin Mass, because then we didn't really have that risk of going through that time of hurt and that time of loneliness and, you know, jumping from this parish to that parish, searching for the reverence and searching for the community that we needed. So it was important to us to find a Latin Mass where we knew, you have your ducky, give me a hug. Where we could find, where we knew we could count on that reverence and that community and that spiritual support and that spiritual feeding that we need. And so I just say all of this to give you an idea of where some of this hurt can be coming from. Now, I can't speak for every Catholic who attends the traditional Latin Mass, but just by sharing my heart, I hope that maybe I can give you a little bit of a sense of that understanding, and just help you understand why a document that puts such strict restrictions on one form of the Mass that it is important to the spiritual lives of an entire subset of Catholics can be very, very hurtful and troubling and confusing, and it's going to take a lot of processing and a lot of patience and humility and charity and prayer, and questioning to really understand, you know, what is this saying and how is this going to play out in our communities and in our parishes. And so personally, you know, I may feel some of those fears and those worries, but I know that, as always, I can't let fear rule my life. We were very encouraged when we went to our Latin Mass this weekend that, you know, the parish was full and it was a solemn high Mass. Our wonderful priests in the area said, we knew you guys needed this, and so they brought in, you know, the priest and the deacon and the subdeacon, and they celebrated for us a solemn high Mass, and they just encouraged us and showed us that they are committed to feeding our spiritual needs. And that was very encouraging, and really helped to restore a sense of that peace within, and just remind us, you know, all we can do is continue to be faithful. So we move forward, doing our best to be patient, to be humble, to practice charity, not to let that fear or any of those other sentiments that we may be feeling. You know, the feelings, they come and go, but we really need to stay rooted in Christ and let His peace really rule our lives. So I guess that's my bit of encouragement to anybody out there who does go to the Latin Mass, just to stay rooted in that peace and stay rooted in prayer and just live your daily lives, continue to be faithful, and that's my goal through all of this right now. So I hope that was helpful. Again, I acknowledge that I don't know all the answers. I'm not a liturgist. I'm not a theologian. I'm just a regular person trying to live out my faith and raise my family to be saints. And so I hope that helps. Please go ahead and leave a comment, drop a line. Let me know if you have any questions. Let me know if you want links to some other resources that I've been reading, watching, looking at, that have been helpful in understanding what this document means. And just say a prayer for me. Say a prayer for all who are hurting and experiencing the hurt. say a prayer for our priests, say a prayer for our bishops, and please, as always, continue to pray for our Pope, Pope Francis. So God bless you all, and I'll talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.